Hello, everyone, and welcome to the October edition of the Cerini Nonprofit Connection. Today, we have with us John Appelt and John Coyne with Prime Auditors. Welcome, guys.
Thank you for having us.
So before we get started, maybe you can spend a couple minutes sharing with us what you do for the nonprofit sector.
Basically our service provides an analysis of any and all telecom utility charge. We do a scrub of all customers' bills. We go back historically. If we can find any errors, we get them refunds back, and we also get rid of any items that they're being billed for currently. We'll, for example, go to a customer's DMARC if it's necessary. We'll actually see the lines and circuits that they're being billed for. It's a detail that you won't get on a regular bill, but we'll really get very granular and just make sure that every single thing they're being billed for is working, the contracts are correct, and everything's billed at the correct rate. If it's not, we'll go back historically, like I say, and try to secure a refund for the customer.
Okay, so you find that oftentimes customers are paying more for their utilities than they should be?
Absolutely, and there's a lot of nuances with not-for-profit billing. Where there are programs that can be tapped into that not-for-profits are not taking advantage of. So it's really just we've been doing this for over 35 years. So it's really just a history of seeing things for years and years where we know what carriers are going to be able to offer better rates than what they are currently giving the customer. So it's really, you've got to ask for it. You've got to know what to look for.
So is this a process of looking at the carriers and saying, hey, we got a better carrier for you? Or is this a process of working with the current carriers that they have and finding ways to make things work more effectively and cheaper with the carriers that are already in place?
Yeah, great question. We basically always want to keep you with the carrier you've got. People don't like to change. If you ask someone if they want to change their cell phone provider, the answer is pretty much always no. I mean, people have this they want to stay with who they've got. It's who they know. But the carriers have more to offer. So we always looking to get better rates for customers going forward.
So when you say carriers have more to offer, that means they send out their highest pricing to begin with, and you have to be smart enough to kind of push them to get lower pricing?
Kind of. I even bring up to people sometimes, if you're going to go buy a car, you're going to walk into the showroom and you're going to say, I want that car, and walk over to the salesman and buy it. I mean, that's not the price you should get. The price you should get should be what all the other not-for-profits are getting, what the cheapest rates that can be negotiated. And, we know all the rocks to look under to make sure that they get that.
So what sort of rocks are there that they should be looking under? What sort of things are you finding that the nonprofit sector kind of should be focusing on here?
Right. I think the biggest thing is probably the governmental component. Every carrier in New York State anyway will put out a product on something called OGS, the Office of General Services. So they'll provide an array of services where a customer can choose any of those prices. And a lot of times they won't even be aware that they can offer that. So it's really incumbent upon us or the customer going back and basically telling the carrier, hey, we want this price that that so and so has. So it's getting a little more public, now that everybody knows what the pricing is, but it's asking for it.
Okay, so we have pricing where maybe they're not charging the correct pricing or the lowest pricing that they possibly can. Mm-hmm. What other things do you typically find on I guess right now we're talking about telecommunications, or?
Yeah, well, there's a couple of different things. Telecommunications, also contracts is very big as well. We find a lot of mistakes in contracts. We find rates going up that should not have gone up.
When you say contracts, you want to?
Sure. If a customer ordered a T1 3 or 4 years ago, and their price was X, and we look at the contract, and these are the components that were on the contract, we'll go to the bill, we'll find those items on there, sometimes at a higher rate, and we'll also find some other things that were not on the contract at all, and that are now on the bill. The names that the different carriers use for things now there's a laundry list of things like carrier cost recovery or billing fee. I mean, the names that they come up with for fees that just really don't apply to anything, has really.
So they don't put the line on there, we just want to overcharge you.
Exactly, you're exactly right, and that's really the truth. That's what it screams to us, but it just looks good on the bill.
Okay, so you're looking then at are we getting the right pricing from the vendor we're working with?
Correct.
Does the invoice match out to the pricing that's laid out within the contract that the customer signed?
Correct.
What other things that might be there that that they should be looking at?
There's been a lot of changes over the years where people are going from the traditional POTS line infrastructure, that they're moving over to internet services, voice over IP, SIP trunking, and we're finding a lot of times where a customer will still be billed for these old POTS lines. When I say POTS lines, it's the plain old telephone service. So it's the infrastructure that's in place now on the telephone poles and the underground cables that the phone company really has no interest in at all anymore. They just want to make money, and that's in cellular, and that's in in FiOS or cable, whatever it might be. So we find a lot of old billings that'll have all these POTS lines on there that the customer isn't even aware that they're paying for, that maybe aren't even working anymore. Maybe an alarm line here or there they might have over traditional services, but a lot of their voice they have moved over to their new billing platform. So we'll go in and we'll make sure, that's where I was talking about the demarcation inspection early on. We'll go in and we'll actually send our tech in there. He'll test the actual points and make sure these things have dial tone, they're working, and they're being used. So things of that nature.
And I think then it's also finding out from the organization whether they're still using it and what they're using it for.
Absolutely.
Because sometimes you're using it for a fax line, or as you said, maybe an alarm line, but
Correct.
For the most part, if you've gone VoIP, there's not much more you need.
Exactly right. Exactly right. And it sounds a little simplistic that we do a dial study as well. We'll actually call every line. We'll do it at a dozen different times of the day just to make sure. And we'll do a usage study as well. So if we come back to a customer and say, hey, you've got these lines that no one answers and they have no usage on them, what do you want to do with them? So, and they can come back to be an alarm line. They can come back to be a metering line for a utility, something like that, or a spare, even though now people don't really need spares anymore. When you say, hey, we've got these POTS lines as spares in case our voice over IP fails, but really cell phones are really that now anyway. So there's really not a need for those kind of spares anymore.
Okay, good. Also, what about things like taxes and things like that? Do you typically find nonprofits are still paying on some of their bills, different types of taxes that maybe they're not subject to?
Yeah, no, great question. Sales tax for sure is one that's easy. We go back 3 years and get sales tax refunds. It's rare that we'll go into a company and not find some sales tax on at least one bill. And if we do, we get that off the bill, and we can go back 3 years to New York State and actually get them a refund check right back from the state. And then we remove those taxes going forward. Some taxes, some surcharges, even though you're a not-for-profit, you still have to pay into. But again, we know what all those are, and we identify those that you shouldn't be paying.
Okay, so when you first started talking about what you do for the nonprofit sector, you talked about telecommunication, but then you also used a broader term, utilities. Mm-hmm. What other utilities do you work with, and what do you do with respect to those utilities?
It's the exact same scrub of a bill that we do for a telecom bill, we do for a utility bill. We will go back historically. We'll get a meter read for the last 3 years, a history of how they're billing. And oftentimes we'll find bad meter reads. You can see an obvious error, and we'll go back on that. We'll get a refund back from the carrier on that. With the advent of ESCOs now taking place, where there are billing suppliers that are out there that are providing the utility, the commodity.
I'm going to throw a timeout here. What is an ESCO?
Okay, a supplier. So you can choose your own supplier now. Mm-hmm. You can't do it electric on Long Island.
So you're talking about like natural gas or oil if you want to have someone come in and fill your tanks.
Correct.
Got it. Yeah. Thank you.
So with natural gas, the billing appears right on the national grid bill. So you'll get your bill, and then you'll see supplier section. It'll either say that you've got national grid for your supplier, or you've chosen an ESCO, or maybe you haven't chosen an ESCO or a supplier, and that's an issue. So if we see that, we're going to check that out as well. There's still plenty of slamming going on. The Public Service Commission, now the Department of Public Service, is always slapping the hands of these guys that do the marketing, where they'll sign you up and you didn't ask to get signed up. So we see that quite often as well.
So is this an area where, unlike the telecommunication, where you look to try to keep them with the same service provider, this might be a place where you try to put them in with a new service provider? Because does it really matter who provides the gas or the oil?
It's all a matter of pricing. The utility company right now is really competitive. It's a little hard for the ESCOs to compete. You really have to know what you're doing to be able to get savings. And again, there's no electric suppliers that are allowed to bill on Long Island. If you hear about one, it's a scam. It's more the fact that if you haven't looked at your bill that closely, that you might have a supplier you didn't know about and you're paying an appreciable rate. So that's the kind of thing we'd help with as well.
And this might be one of those scams that you just talked about, but I've heard instances where there are people who buy blocks of energy and stuff like that, and then they sell off the blocks of energy and say they can get you better pricing through the blocks of energy. Is that something that's viable, not viable? Is that something that should be explored?
Yeah, absolutely. That's legitimate. Although that kind of buying is usually more for electricity. And not on Long Island, but that kind of buying, it can be done, and certainly, can be a benefit to the customer. And a customer can kind of, a large customer can take a risk and say, hey, I think that the market's going to go up or not go up. And if an ESCO, a supplier, wants to offer a rate for the entire year, so you can take a risk on that as well. So there are, a lot of issues with that you can investigate.
So some of the people who are tuning into this are not from Long Island. They're from New York City and the surrounding boroughs. They could be from upstate.
Okay.
Are there things there that are different from Long Island that maybe they should be thinking about?
Oh yeah, 100%. When you're talking about the electric world, there's a lot that can be done, for sure. If you've got an ESCO in New York City or a spot where an ESCO is allowed to go into, if you can buy, a year or 2-year contract, there are definitely ways to save money there. There was a period, the kilowatt hour is now 8, 9, 10, 11 cents a kilowatt hour right now. But back 3 or 4 years ago, there was a time when New York City was paying 26, 27 cents a kilowatt. So you really never know what's going to happen. The industry has kind of leveled off where it's been really good. But we kind of see the flow of the markets. When you see your gas prices go up, kind of the other pieces will go up as well. So you never know what's going to happen. It's a crazy world, and if something changes, anything can that'll affect the market as well.
Is that one of the things that you guys do to help the sector, help them find an ESCO or help them find someone that they can work with? Or is that not, or do you have your own? Or
no, not at all. What we usually do in a case like that, if a customer would like to explore that option, we can provide them several options. We'll get them several bids, and then they can make the decision on that.
Okay. So to kind of answer your question about the gas particularly, what happens, we buy the gas from an outside supplier. Once it hits New York State, it's put through the pipe, so to speak. And all gas would come through that area. And if you look at your bill, there's 2 parts of the bill for gas. One is the supplier, as John mentioned, and the other is a transportation cost. We can't control the transportation delivery cost, but we do control the supply cost. And the two together make up your bill for that month.
Okay.
And of course, the bills change monthly because the cost of gas, electricity changes on a monthly basis. So that's another thing you have to be wary of. A lot of times when you get into a company that's unscrupulous, once you as a customer, they will gradually increase the rates because no one really knows what a bill looks like. They just pay the bill because it's something beyond their scope. And gradually will increase because you're talking therms and calories of kilowatts. And you can just increase that a penny or two over time. And that's where the unscrupulous companies scam the customer.
I think also what you find is with, most of the services that nonprofits, when they look at their where they're going to cut costs and stuff, they don't always think about utilities and telecommunications because those are things they don't think they have a lot of control over. They don't think that's an area. I mean, you can go and you can, look at your payroll, or you can go in and throw accounting services out to bid, though. Guys, don't do it if you're my clients. But there are other things you can do. You don't necessarily think that you can go out to bid for, or, challenge the monopoly of the electric company or something like that, or the telecommunication companies. So,
and I think there's also a feeling that this business is a little scammy. I mean, it's been getting a lot better. Again, the DPS has really cleaned a lot of that stuff up. But yeah, there are definitely savings to be found, especially on the electric side.
Okay. To follow up too, as you probably determined, John is a technician. He is the guru, if you will, on this. He's been doing it for many years. I'm more of bringing in the clients to the organization. And when I do presentations at networking events, the first thing I ask the group, who understands their telephone, electricity bill, or gas bill? They just pay it automatically. They have no clue. So they don't even look at it. They just pay the bill because who can live without gas and electricity? No one. So it's paid automatically. And until you look into it in a more detailed fashion, you don't know how you're doing for a true prospective cost basis.
So pretty much, well, let's take a step back. We've talked about a bunch of different things that you can do and ways you've helped nonprofit organizations. You want to share a couple success stories that maybe you guys had?
Want me to do that?
That's your domain.
Yeah, we've done a lot of large not-for-profits, March of Dimes, Habitat for Humanity. We just finished up work for a school district, a very large school district in Nassau County, where we got them back over $100,000. And that was one of those examples where they went over to a new VoIP platform, and they had about 100 POTS lines that they were no longer using. So it's things like that. And they told the phone company, we asked to have those disconnected. So there's an issue there. We have to go back and get a refund from them. So we find a lot of that stuff too. In fact, this school district was a Verizon POTS line user, and they went over to a Verizon voice over IP platform. And Verizon just never took the old billing off. So it was one of those issues we were able to go back and get an appreciable amount of money.
What do you, if you can, and there may not be a standard, but what do you see as the typical savings you get for a client?
Yeah, that's really tough. We can do a large company that we don't get anything back for. We can do a small company that we can get, a few $1,000s back for. Just a real rough estimate. We've come up with something that whatever your bill is a month, if you're paying $3,000 a month, you can expect hopefully a $3,000 or so refund going back.
Going back, what, 6 years? Or
Depends
3 years?
on what the issue is. It'd be 3 years on taxes. If it's a contract issue, it will be whenever the contract was initiated. So really, that's a mixed bag as well as how far we can go back.
Okay. But you say typically an organization can save, in essence, 1/12 of their cost.
That's what we're hoping for, sure.
Okay.
In addition to, aside from getting the refund, what they have to realize also, it's going forward. Every month, that bill is going to be less.
Mm-hmm.
For as long as they're with that supplier. So it's more than just that refund that they will enjoy.
Okay. So, I mean, with these potential savings, why wouldn't someone want to go and do this?
We're always asking ourselves that, for sure. I think the major stumbling blocks we have are people don't want to do the work to get all the bills together. They think it's cumbersome on their side, where they have to pull all these old bills for us to be able to do our audit. And really the opposite is true. We only need a copy of 1 month's worth of invoicing to do our audit. And then we provide the customer with what we call a letter of authorization, which we put on their letterhead and we send to their various providers. And then we get all our customer service records and billing histories directly from the provider with the customer's permission.
So what's involved with one of these audits?
We basically need a copy of 1 month's worth of billing, the authorization to be able to do it. And typically an audit will take, depending on the customer size, 2 to 4 months to complete. But we really, again, we're going back to that same piece that I had stated in the beginning. We're really scrubbing those bills and getting those customer service records and making sure we account for every component that they're being billed for.
Okay.
In addition to that, the times frame is, if you understand how it all works, we first get that invoice. We look at it to look for any problems. We then send it to the telephone provider. Now you can understand they're not going to be anxious to give out back money or cut rates. So they take their time. They in turn look at that bill and challenge us, or we have a discussion in that regard, send back what they finally come up with as a savings and a discount or new rate. We then have to look at that to see if that's correct and if there's any discord or discussion. So it can take longer because of those kind of transitions. And important to know that to show how we work, which I think is very important, when any refund is made, it goes directly to the client. And then we bill the client and we share in the commission. So it's no cost to the client, which is important. To further discuss about, it's getting more difficult with all the hacking going on. People are afraid to give any information out. They think if we look at the telephone bill, we're going to find something unscrupulous. So there's a hesitancy there just because of what's going on in a more global sense.
Right.
Because our client list, if you look at it, it's pages of lists of of clients since they've been in business over 35 years. But it is more difficult today. And again, when you factor in, it costs nothing. It doesn't take away from your employer's time to send one bill in, and they can scan it in. They don't have to send it in any other way. And once they do that, their involvement in the whole process is done. Then the ball's in our court, and the telephone provider or whoever we're dealing with, they didn't have to do their magic. And that is a cycle, if you will, in the auditing process.
Is there a particular size organization you'll work with, or you pretty much work with any sized organization?
Yeah, we don't discriminate. We definitely, the smaller bill is fine as well. Those are easier, they go quicker, and we oftentimes, find discrepancies there for sure.
I'll give you an example. When I was in my office in Garden City, the next office was occupied by an attorney. It was just himself and two assistants, two women who did the administrative work. And out of courtesy, I said, let me take a look at your bill. And he was dealing with a major company, telephone provider. So we took his bill, did our magic, and here's a one-person organization, if you will. We didn't get a refund for him, but we saved him $3,000 a year on his telephone bill. And of course, we've also gone all the way up to the city of New York, just the Board of Education of New York City. We returned a check to them of over $4 million. So to answer the question, we can do one-person operation. This is a business, from one-person business all the way up to the city of New York.
Is there any segment of the nonprofit sector that fares better in these types of reviews than others, or pretty much it's pretty much open to any?
The only thing I would say is if someone's got a group home environment, we've noticed a lot about that recently, where there are some savings that can be found because of that, things they're not taking advantage of. Really, no. It's pretty much uniform across the board, the same types of errors.
Okay. Other than the FCC ruling on the schools and libraries, I know this is not particular germane to the nonprofits, but we're allowed to go back 6 years, including interest, if any missed billings. So when you take that back 6 years, sometimes the numbers become very attractive and very large.
All right, so let's talk about that. I mean, you say that, schools and libraries, I mean, you have multiple different types of schools. You have, the public schools, which are quasi-government, same with libraries, but you also have nonprofit schools and nonprofit libraries. So on the nonprofit front, again, you could have a nonprofit library, but on the school front, you could have a private nonprofit school, like a Holy Cross or Chaminade or any of those. Mm-hmm. You could have a special education school, like the ACLDs and DDIs of the world that work with the special education population. Or you can have early intervention, which is not necessarily through the state education department, it's through the Department of Health, but they're all kind of schools too. Right. And even on the library side, you could have, the governmental libraries and the nonprofit libraries. So do they have the same benefit of going back 6 years if they're a nonprofit school? And are there other things that they have in terms of a benefit that, because they're a school, they may have the same benefit that a school district would have?
Yeah, a real quick history on the E-rate program, which was the Telecommunications Act of 1996. That's kind of evolved where customers can ask for these E-rate funds. It's overseen by the FCC and the USAC organization. So those funds are available, and the funding is based upon usually what the need is. So if you've got somebody at a school district that's poor, they'll get 80 or 90% of their bill paid by E-rate. If it's an affluent district like Garden City, they might only have 10 or 20% of their bill paid by the federal government. But it's a lot of money, and it's something that there are times with not-for-profits where they've got some programs that might fit that criteria, where they could use the benefit of the E-rate program and they're not aware of it. So that's anybody that's got a school and that they do some kind of teaching, there's a good chance that they can apply for E-rate funding.
Okay, so let's stay on that a second. So E-rate funding is a reduction of telecommunication. You said that's telecommunication and internet?
Yeah, it's telecommunication and internet. It's not a reduction. What happens is if
it's a subsidy.
Correct, exactly. And it depends on, actually it's based upon school lunches, believe it or not. So if X amount of kids are applying for school lunches in this district, it has the appearance that's a poorer district and they'll get more money. And the whole thing was set up originally to bring internet to all the rural areas that the schools that didn't have it and make everybody on an even playing field.
So if there is a school, private school, or special education school or anything that is receiving some level of a food program, whether it be, the standard federal food program, CACFP, any of those, then, and they're not getting E-rate, those are ones that should be thinking about it because they might be entitled to E-rate because they are getting some sort of free or reduced meal program.
Absolutely. 100%. And yeah, that's, and E-rate's not being distributed in a great way. If you look on your bill, you'll see the charge for Universal Service Fund. That's how it appears on your phone bill. And they can be 10 to 20% that fee. The way it's been distributed, the way the carriers have abused the system a little bit, if you will, it's become difficult. And that's kind of, we're watching out for that as well and make sure the carriers do the right thing and rebate these monies if they owe the customers.
What about if a school is in, and sorry, I don't mean to harp on schools, but
Sure.
Something that I do a lot of work in. So what about if a school is in a low income area? Mm-hmm. They would qualify for federal programs for food, but they just don't tap into the food programs. Are they still subject or allowed to qualify for E-rate, or they have to be part of the federal food program too?
Great question, because a lot of the carriers will try to make that part of the component that they have to give this lower rate to the schools, but they're supposed to. The ruling, the lowest corresponding price ruling from the FCC said, hey, if you're a school that fits the criteria, you better be giving them the lowest rate. And that's the key, is that the carriers have a responsibility to give the lowest rate to any school across the board, and they're not doing that. So if they're not doing that, they really need to give a refund back to the school that they've been overcharging and give them a re-rate of what they've been charging to what the lowest price is.
So when you say lowest price, again, so we got a lowest price, and then there could be a subsidy of that lowest price under E-rate.
Correct.
So
yes.
it's two different distinct
correct.
things. So I have the lowest pricing based upon what my bill rate is compared to what other schools are potentially paying.
Correct.
So if I'm a private school, I should be paying the same rate that a public school should be paying?
Absolutely, yes.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it is interesting. Yeah.
Didn't you, a few years back, this is before my time, when we wrote to New York State to get a special ruling because they weren't looking at this. And when the FCC put this into play back in 1996, we have articles saying they admitted we don't have the resources to really follow up on this. It's a great rule, and we're doing something very beneficial, but we just can't track this down. Didn't write a letter to New York State where they wrote a letter out to all schools that this is being done and please follow these rules, but like anything else,
right?
It's like jaywalking, or it's not always followed. So it's an educational thing.
So this whole concept of lowest pricing, is that, again, just for schools, or that's for any nonprofit, or that's particular or specific just for schools?
We've kind of got a crossover component there, because if a school is getting it, it's usually the lowest price usually is the state funding we talked about, like the Office of General Services. And those are contracts that are available to schools and libraries and not-for-profits and hospitals. So really the rates are going to be the same in about 80 or 90% of the cases.
Okay, so it's really just that E-rate subsidy that's available to schools and only to schools and libraries.
That is exactly.
Okay, sorry. I'm
No,
harping on this.
It's not easy.
If I have a nonprofit, so let's take this a step back. In order to be a school, does that mean they have to be incorporated under the education law? It doesn't matter whether they're incorporated under the education law. They could be incorporated under the nonprofit law.
It depends. It really is a case-by-case basis in some of those areas where it's a little gray. But usually we'll find that a carrier will, although it might not be a refund situation, we'll find a carrier will look at them the same way that they look at schools.
Because I'm also thinking of religious organizations where I've got a church or a synagogue that has a daycare component or a school component. My brain's working right now in terms of going through my client list. Like, okay, So they would work, or a JCC,
Yeah.
which has educational components to the JCC, or maybe an organization that is working with the developmentally disabled population, which has a training program to, or even not developmentally, the old VESID program in terms of the trainings and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's many nonprofit organizations that have some level of educational component to them. They may not be a school, they're not getting their funding through the state education department, but they are doing some level of training or education or something else.
Correct.
So all of those could potentially fall into this, and you'd have to look at it on a case-by-case basis.
Yeah, but 90% of the time, I think we'll be able to do something for them. Whether it's going to be a historical refund, I don't know, but pretty much always getting the pricing going forward should not be an issue.
Another part too, I haven't gotten involved in this. Maybe John again can carry on this area. The paperwork involved, or how to really do this. I mean, we're talking about the E-rate as a generic, a simple procedure, but it's like doing your taxes. How many people have CPAs to do their taxes because it's so complex? Maybe you can go into more detail, because I haven't got involved in that, but the actual paperwork and how to get a refund or a reduction, what that entails.
Yeah, even with a sales tax claim to New York State, you'd say, okay, I'm going to go back to New York State and get my 36-month refund. There's a special office to send it to. I mean, there's follow-up. You got to be very specific. So there are nuances to getting these rebates for sure.
Okay. Does some of this also have to do with the relationship you've built up with the carriers, or no? It's just, this is really open to anybody.
It is open to anybody. I say our relationship with the carriers at times is tenuous at best. We're always looking out for the client. So, but in some cases that works to our advantage as well, because they really know that the thing we're asking for is warranted, and they'll grant it. So it works both ways.
Okay. All right. So we've talked about telecommunications. We've talked about utilities. We've talked about the E-rate program, which is specific for schools and libraries.
Mm-hmm.
What other pieces are out there that you guys kind of deal with?
In regards to
any places you can kind of work with the nonprofit sector to kind of help them along here?
You have other
Well, it's as John was saying, it's somewhat nebulous. We just want to get that invoice, because the bottom line costs them nothing. And the worst case scenario is that they're either paying the best rate and they're doing the best for that particular energy situation, telephone communications, whatever it may be. At least they're getting a free look and pick
free assessment
of their situation, and that's valuable in its own right, because that's taking that part of the expense equation out of their duties to worry about. There's many ways to cut on costs, and they can then direct their energies into another area.
Okay. Well, one of the things, and you've mentioned that part of what you're looking to do is to go back and negotiate with the carriers to try to bring down the pricing. I've seen in instances where you go and you do a negotiation, you get the pricing down, and a year later that pricing pops back up to a higher level.
Mm-hmm.
How do you ensure that reduction in pricing sticks, and that kind of stays for the long term?
Yeah, we try to stay away from the promotional programs that'll get you that year's worth of savings, and then your billing will go back up. One of our big things with telecom right now is we find a lot of contracts have the rates in there, and they're supposed to be for whatever it is, 3 or 4 or 5 years, and then we notice gradually these rates going up every couple of years. And when you check into it further, a lot of the carriers unfortunately have these hidden fees where it'll say rates are effective, can change as according to log on to this website and see where there's a possibility. And those rates can be those items can say something like the rates can change from time to time. I mean, that's how open-ended they leave this stuff. So you have to watch your contracts, and you have to make sure that you're getting what you're paying for.
Okay. Since this is October and we're kind of close to Halloween, what scary stories do you have where a client has come in with something and you kind of just shook your head at it and just like, wow?
We had a great one at St. Francis College.
It's okay. It's okay.
I had a friend who introduced me to school, and John and I went to Brooklyn to to have a discussion with the president of the college and their CEO, and they happened to have their telephone bill, and they flipped it over to us, and John looked at it quickly, and when he did, and this is a matter of seconds, he realized they were paying the sales tax, and they're a nonprofit.
Yeah.
I mean, here he is, a major university college for years being in business, not even knowing they don't have to pay a sales tax. So it's proven over time that I don't care what they think or say, please give me your 1 month's invoice, and I then deliver it to John, and he does his magic, because you never know what you're going to find. And since it takes very little effort to do that, and it costs nothing, it is kind of a no-brainer. It's a matter of just executing what we're asking.
So is that what the process that you do is known as? It's known as magic?
Yeah, I don't know about that. Just going back to, to John's point on some of the items that we found in the past. I think a lot of those, when we talked about the customer service records we get from the providers, that's where you'll find a lot of stuff. When a customer looks at their phone bill and they'll see a lump service charge, it's going to be for, let's say, $1,000. They don't really know what's on that, and a lot of times we'll find things like burglar alarms or circuits on there from many years ago, things that go from the main location to buildings that were torn down 10 or 20 years ago.
Sold off.
Or sold off, yeah. So we find a lot of those. I'm like, oh my God, I didn't know I had that circuit still on there. They don't even know what it was. In fact, something right now with alarms is something that's changed over the years. There used to be a point-to-point direct circuit from the customer's location to the fire department, let's say, or the police department. They don't really support those anymore. So those are pretty much gone. Those are facilities that the phone company is abandoning as quickly as they can. And most people now are doing alarms through companies where they'll do it over a POTS line, or they'll do it over the internet. But those old-fashioned circuits we don't see anymore, but we certainly see them on the bill.
So while they've abandoned the support of them, they haven't abandoned the billing for them.
That is correct. And sometimes you think that's an automatic refund. In some cases, it's not. The phone company will say, well, we provide that bill every month. The customer never questioned it, and they never told us they want to sell off that building. So there's a lot of dancing to do with that before we can actually get a refund.
How much does the relationship that they currently have with the customer and the desire to keep that relationship intact come into play, or it really doesn't? Yeah,
that's a great question. We find with the larger customers, we can talk that talk a little bit and say, hey, these guys have been a great customer of yours for X number of years. They spend all this money, and if you want to keep them, you really should do the right thing. So that works in our favor sometimes, for sure. It's mostly with the larger clients.
There's another very important point regarding the telecommunications. AT&T and Verizon have their sales force, and many of the companies have been solicited to take a look at their bills, and which they get the same thing we do, get 1 month's bill. They look at it, and they come back with a different proposal, saving money. However, the only way they can save that money, they have to go from the current telephone provider to their telephone provider. And as John mentioned earlier, a lot of people don't want to change their telephone provider. They're comfortable. They know they've had some comfort zone of going forward. So those people are a dime a dozen. They come in, and the only way they can make any money is if they change to a new provider. And that's very important, because people have said to me many times, oh, wow, we've already done this. But in reality, they haven't. We really look at the bill and do a true audit, looking for all these different service charges to see if they are accurate and make sense. The whole different dimension between just selling them a new provider versus what we do. We do a true audit.
Right, got it.
And one other thing with going back to the sales tax, actually, Ken, that refund we get back from New York State, the 3-year refund, we can include any bills in that. Like we can take the utility bills, the telephone bills that might have that, and even if they've got bills from their supply company for paper or whatever, if there's sales tax on those, we can include all of those invoices in our claim for a refund back 3 years.
Okay. Sorry to kind of switch gears and go back to something we've talked about already, but I just wanted to get a clarification, and I'm sorry, I'm going back to E-rate a second. But you mentioned E-rate was for telecommunications. Does that work for both landlines, VoIP, as well as cellular, or is cellular included in that or not included in E-rate?
E-rate is a product for traditional landlines and internet. It is not for cellular.
Okay.
Okay. And now we're finding that, well, actually the piece on the traditional POTS line service, et cetera, is really kind of going away. Not too many schools, they've phased that out over time because of everybody going to SIP trunking and voice over IP trunks. So the major component right now in the E-rate funding giving back to schools is on internet-based products.
Okay. So, but that doesn't mean that if someone has a still have POTS lines that they can't. So I don't know who still has POTS line these days, but if anybody still has POTS lines,
right?
They can.
You'd be surprised. You'd be surprised how many people still have them. You know, we find that quite often.
Okay. Is there anything else that you would like to share with the listeners today?
Well, I think John does this too, because that's his expertise. Any outdated services, because as you know, technology, particularly in telecommunication, is a current event. So if John sees something that's outdated or we can improve on something, he will certainly articulate that to the client at that time.
Yeah, and something else too, to your point, John, if a customer is thinking, hey, you know what, I think I want to try to upgrade our telecom situation, I want to go to a different platform, ways we can save money, more functionality in the system that we have, a lot of carriers that we can bring to the table, and we know the rates. So we'd be more than happy to provide that information to them. And if they choose one of the carriers we provide, we would get compensated from the carrier. So it's kind of like shopping, and we do all the work, and they can choose the provider.
So that's part of it too. It's not just, hey, let me look at the bill and see what I can save you in terms of what you've got, but also, hey, do the fees that you're paying make sense? So even if I can't save you anything through the current carrier, there might be other carriers out there that you're aware of that can do it at a cheaper price or.
Correct. And I think everybody's looking at that today. Everyone's looking to, ways to streamline and to use all the technology that's out there. So if that's the case, if someone's thinking about that, we can help with that as well.
I think that's important in the nonprofit sector anyway, because the government seems to be cutting back on how much they're giving to organizations, and organizations need to constantly find ways to either bring in other discretionary dollars through fundraising or find ways to cut the costs that they currently have in place. And, if I can cut back on some of my administrative costs, that's going to be a plus. It's like, if you can find them, $10,000 a year in savings, you just found them a $10,000 donation per year.
Sure. Absolutely.
Exactly.
100%. And again, going back to the same thing, it's a seamless audit, and it's there's no risk. There's no risk involved. So there's, really, why not give it a try? If it's not us, anybody, just have an audit done of your bills and make sure you're paying the lowest rates.
All right, cool. If a nonprofit organization was interested in speaking to you guys, how could they reach you, or how could they contact you? That seems to be you. You're the salesperson.
Well, I do as a business card. I recommend, quite honestly, to go to our website.
If you hold up a business card, people aren't going to be able to see it. So why don't you give out your website information and give out your phone information?
We go to primeorders.com. If you look at our website, I personally think it's a very good website because it's very easy to follow. It breaks everything down very succinctly, and it's just easy to comprehend and understand. And I think the biggest selling point when I talk to clients or potential clients, just take a look at our client list, plural. We have every possible segment out there because everyone needs telecommunications, be it cell phones, telephones. You can't function without that. So we do it all, as they say, and that is the way I go forward. I educate. As I said earlier, most people don't even know this service exists. I had called with 5 principals in accounting firms before I even got into this 4 years ago, only to find out that they responded the same way, saying, we don't do it. And in fact, we didn't know you could do it. So that really enhanced my decision to go forward to go into this business.
Yeah, and not-for-profits are really one of our largest vertical markets for sure. And it feels good to help the not-for-profits. We've helped quite a few folks in the past, and we feel good about that.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, John and John. Sounds right, John and John. I just felt it would be weird if I called you the Johns. So if everybody would like to tune in next Thursday, November 14th, when our guest will be Nicole Epstein from Gotham Government Relations and Communication. Nicole will be discussing how to effectively harness government relations. So thank you, everybody, for joining in today.